Hey everybody, I'm joined by Mike Pindara, aka Arcane Motion, who is an expert 3D motion designer with strong expertise in compositing work as well. His prior work includes work for Doritos, Bic, Intel, and more. As well, his toolkit includes Cinema 4D and Unreal Engine, plus other tools such as Adobe After Effects and more. Mike has a decade of motion design under his belt. He has a strong foundation and wealth of knowledge when it comes to expertise and general understanding of how the industry works and so forth. Mike, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely, Grant. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, so I gotta ask, Mike, what got you into motion design?
Honestly, do you want the long version or the
Yeah, we're here. Let's go.
All right, cool. So when I was younger, my uncle was working in the video game industry, and I went to take your kid to work day with him, and it was like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever, So I got to be involved in this. Fast forward into high school, I'm like, all right, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to do video games. I don't know what that means, but that's what I'm going to do. And so then I found my way into a computer graphics major at Purdue, and that kind of opened my eyes to just the behind the scenes of how things actually work. And then I kind of wanted to pivot my way into specifically more animation related stuff. And then after going through that, I kind of learned what I needed to know. I took an internship at a place here in Chicago that kind of opened my eyes to what like the motion design world is. Because prior to that, it was like, all right, I want to do animation that's either video games or film. And, realizing there's this kind of whole other industry that's booming that I could hop into. So that kind of made me pivot a little bit more. And that kind of launched me into wanting to get into the motion design world. Finished school, got booked for a week at a place, and then got canned as a freelancer. And then I was working at Potbelly, a sandwich shop, for like a year. And then towards the end of that year, I was just hanging out and making some guys sandwiches and just being friendly. And they were like, they kind of seemed like they had a rough day. And I was just asking what was going on, how the Friday was. And they're like, oh, well, and they gave me like the spiel that we give people when we, are trying to explain our job to people. And I kind of picked up on that and went, oh, like, you mean like motion design stuff? And they're like, yeah, that's what we do. And I was like, oh, that's what I went to school for. And they gave me their card. And then that kind of like launched me in because I started moonlighting with them. And then they brought me on full time after a couple months. And then the rest is, history. But yeah, that's kind of what kind of launched me into the industry pretty much.
That's awesome. So you really had like the coffee shop experience where you worked at a coffee shop, essentially. You end up like just networking and you end up running across someone who's like, hey, this is it. This is the opportunity. It's time to like go for it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It all kind of just boiled down to, just being friendly to everybody. And, that kind of panned out for me. So I'm very fortunate in that respect. But yeah, that was, a wild one for sure.
Do you feel like a lot of the soft skills that you learned during that year working at that shop really carried over and was super beneficial for you when you started doing more the motion design work at agencies and so forth?
I think so, because a lot of it kind of boils down to, being able to put your head down and do your work and, still being humble and friendly to everyone and kind of, if anything, more like the client interaction experience, because everybody, all kinds of people come in to buy a sandwich. And thankfully there's a bit of a filter that happens with the people that are trying to get a motion design project, but that has definitely helped out a bunch just in terms of, communicating with people, explaining options and explaining, what our job even is and does. So yeah, I think that definitely has kind of filtered into how I operate.
I know you started Arcane Motion around 2019 in that time. It was a little bit before the 2020 pandemic really hit. How did you maneuver through that pandemic with your freelance business?
Thankfully, having like the year and a half leading up to that, I got a good handle on the studios in Chicago, which there are a bunch. So I was going into studios, as often as I was booked, and made a lot of cool connections that way. In addition to that, Chicago has a really cool meetup scene where pretty much like once a month, we're getting together at a bar or place and hanging out and just kind of, hitting that community aspect of, the motion design world kind of locally. And I made a lot of other freelance connections through that, which really helped us all kind of, share some work when we were busy or, bounce ideas off each other, ask about our rates, that kind of stuff. So that was a huge launch pad into kind of getting thrown into the whole world once, everything went remote. But I think a lot of the big connections that I made in that year and a half of working at studios was kind of what lifted me into, being able to handle, being fully remote and all the, craziness that's come from since 2020 and all that.
Absolutely. And are you still doing remote work now, or are you going into office?
Yeah, I've only been inside a studio for about 2 days in the last 4 years. So,
wow.
Yeah, exactly. And that, they're kind of the only place that has been interested in having me come in at all. And I just had a puppy at the time. So I was like, maybe I'll just come in for a couple of days and then be back at home. But yeah. But now that everything is really opened up, a lot of the places I'm working with are more, on the coasts or, all around, rather than just the Chicago studios I've been working with in the past. So that's
absolutely
what's the most.
How is it integrating into those different studios and agencies pipelines being remote?
Sometimes it's really smooth. Some places are very relaxed about things, and they'll just send you a Dropbox link to sync, and you can just work in their project structure, and they have hopefully some kind of Slack or, some kind of direct communication rather than bouncing emails. So some places make it really smooth and kind of don't make a big deal of it, but other bigger places, they'll give you a company email and make sure you log into their Teams, and then you gotta, sign all the other stuff so you can log into their remote machine. And so it kind of varies on maybe the scale of the place that you're working with, or sometimes just, how relaxed they are about, their pipeline and how specific it needs to be. Because some places, they don't care what you name files, and they don't care where they get saved. As long as the deliverable folder has the deliverable in it, they're stoked. But yeah, so it's kind of, it takes a lot of communication on my end. I try to do that just to let me ask the person in charge, be like, where do you want this? What should I name this? So when I evaporate in, 2 weeks when my booking is over, you guys have the opportunity to find and open up the files that I made, and everything makes sense, at least. So I really try to push for that, because I know I'm not there full time. I'm a temporary person who's just gonna, be gone to the wind once the time is over. And I think that's a super important lesson for freelancers, is blending into people's pipelines rather than, saying this is how I do things and it's better or worse, or this is what I'm going to do. I think being flexible is like the key to kind of all of that.
Definitely agree with that. So I imagine you've worked in various ecosystems such as Google ecosystem, working with like SharePoint, proprietary systems, things like that. What is your favorite one to work in and why?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think Dropbox is now the smoothest option. In terms of, you can send someone a link, they can sync it to their hard drive or whatever. They can say where it gets saved on their machine. Because some of the ones like Box, it has to be on your main hard drive, which usually isn't very big and full of a bunch of other stuff. So if you're working on a big project, memory and save files become a big issue. I just started working with OneDrive, but that's a whole extra headache because of the logins and stuff, because I'm on PC. So I think Dropbox is like the smoothest jump in, jump out, no one has to worry about anything option. Because it's as flexible, and that's kind of all people really need, I think.
I definitely feel like Dropbox is smooth. I know on our end we're typically using like Google Drive, for instance. I found that to be like very smooth as well. I don't like SharePoint. I'm just gonna say it. I'm not a fan of SharePoint.
Yeah, exactly. It's never good.
I don't know, man. It always feels like either my account is locked for some reason, or like I get links and I open it and it's like, you can't access it. And then their IT is going, but you can. I'm like, no, like I literally can't. Here's the screenshot. It's just back and forth.
Yeah.
So let's talk project files. I feel like it's kind of ambiguous for a lot of people when it comes to project files when you're working with a client as to like, should they pay extra for project files? Is it a case where if you're on friendly terms with them, you kind of just give them project files? So what is kind of like your preference?
Sure. Yeah, I think the big kind of takeaway that I tried to lock into, I don't do a lot of direct to client work. And if I do something like that, that's usually where I'll build in, like, if you guys want the, actual project files, that's an add-on to the project rate and all that. But if I'm just working with a studio, like they're bringing me in for 2 weeks, they're probably handing me most of their files anyway. Someone's going to maybe need to jump into it right away afterwards. I'm not going to bother them with like, here's my day rate. And also, if you want all the stuff I made, like you booked me to work for you for this amount of time, you get what I make. It's less headache for you. It's less headache for me. And it just seems like a better relationship in terms of, being easy to work with. granted, there's bigger stuff that happens, and kind of like I said, if it's direct client, then what are they even going to do with it? Are they going to hire somebody else after me who's cheaper to finish it off or something like that? But if I'm booked for the studio for a couple days or for 2 weeks, then that's less my concern, because they already, they got 2 weeks out of me, and I'm just trying to help them get their projects together. So I think that's kind of the line I draw is, who am I working with? What type of booking is it? I think that's kind of where that ends up.
It's always interesting too, and if in those moments where you are working direct to client, when they ask for project files, but that they're on their end, they don't really have someone who knows the tools anyway, so it becomes a bit of a it's like, cool, I'll give it to you, but what can you do with it?
Yeah, exactly. And like, I doing a lot of 3D work, I'm rendering a bunch of EXR sequences that are huge in file size, and then I got to be like, okay, where can I upload, half a terabyte of data for you guys to have, if that's what you want? And they go, oh, we didn't realize that. So, a lot of things like that kind of start to come up, and you realize they're just asking because I think that's kind of an agency default, is to ask for things after they finish a project. I think that's kind of where you can start to pick away the parts, is when you ask someone, what they need or any specifics about it. You can kind of deduce if it's just them asking for the sake of asking, or if they actually know that they're going to need these down the road.
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but over the past year, you've done a bit of a journey into Unreal Engine, right?
Yeah, I kind of last year-ish, I started poking around in it just to see how flexible it could be.
Can you tell me a little bit about that journey? And is that something you kind of feel like is really a staple part of your toolkit, or something that motion designers in general should be looking at?
Sure. I think I've still I'm still toes in the water at this point with it, I think. But from what I kind of gathered with it, it's really cool as, a 3D person from, a regular DCC going into it and being like, whoa, this looks good as soon as I open the application, or I drop a model in. That is very cool and fun to mess with. I know there's a lot of detail and specific things that start to pop up once you start to try to do the work like we're used to. And that's, that's any program. There's all the everything I know about C4D is a bunch of little tweaks and things that can go wrong or eventually go wrong, or, think bugs to look for. So that it's kind of the same in that respect. And my main reason for wanting to add it into my toolkit was more just so that if I did get a client that came to me and they needed something really big, but their budget couldn't afford, 20 hours of rendering or a render farm, all that stuff. So my goal was really to kind of use it as a cost-saving method. But I haven't really bumped into that yet, or haven't really had the confidence to really throw it at a client project and make it work. So I still got a little bit of testing to do in that respect, but it seems like more and more people that I talk to are already doing stuff in it. I have some friends here in Chicago that are already doing virtual production stuff and kind of just diving headfirst into it. So it seems like it's definitely on the way to being another tool for us to use and kind of bypass some hurdles that clients might have doing 3D work.
I want to go back a little bit to that conversation though, because I think you hit on a really good point in the response, and that was talking about the essentially 20 hours of rendering in Cinema 4D, whether doing Redshift, Octane, or anything like that, versus just doing a quick render in Unreal Engine. And it's interesting because I saw a post online a couple weeks back talking basically how it feels like Unreal Engine is quick on render, but it's a ton more work setting things up versus Cinema 4D, which is if you're used to it, you're used to how your render engine works. It's a lot quicker to set things up, but it takes a lot longer to render things out and, go in and composite if you need to, whether it be crypto mats or anything like that.
Totally. Yes. Yeah. I think that's a great way to kind of phrase it, is there's a lot of extra stuff that's more under the hood in Unreal that we're used to seeing on the main, control panel. It's like C4D and Redshift and those kind of things. So it's kind of the translation, I think, is where the friction still is, is getting from, I know how to do this with Redshift. What hidden menu checkbox do I need to turn on in Unreal to get it to do what I need it to do, kind of stuff. So I think that's kind of still why it's not as easy for everyone to just pick it up and start running. That in addition to how the file structure works with Unreal. Because, with the Cinema, you can just link a texture to a folder and you're good. But because Unreal's a game engine, it needs to ingest everything and save it in a way that the engine can run it. So the file size starts to get really big. And if you're not kind of like me getting started, if you're not aware that that's about to happen, all of a sudden, you've got a really big folder and you're not really sure where it's all coming from or how to manage that. So, but I think that sounds like that's kind of on their radar as far as bringing motion design people like us into the fold with, using Unreal. So it sounds like they're probably making at least I've heard they're making a lot of transitions to make stuff like that easier for our end. So hopefully that's the case.
Definitely. And I believe it was in the recent build they just dropped, the put motion graphics into the tool now. It's no longer just Project Avalanche. It is actually in Unreal Engine, which is super exciting. Let's talk about the motion design group in Chicago, though. What is the full name of it? Does it have like a specific name?
Yeah, we are Chicago Motion Artist Group. And that has kind of been around for longer than I've even lived in Chicago and been in the industry. I think I was we had a meetup a couple days ago. Usually first Wednesday of the month is when we try to find a place to do something. And it really has just been like for me as a full-time person wanting to go freelance, it was incredible to meet a bunch of other freelancers and other artists who like have a bunch of experience, are very willing to like share their knowledge with people, or just, want to hang out and complain about clients or, complain about software stuff and kind of like vent that kind of stuff off. But yeah, this year we've definitely tried to make a push to reaching out to more people and getting our communication, a little easier and smoother, because right now we have kind of a Slack channel that has, a bunch of Chicago people, past and present. And that's where we do a lot of our communicating. That's like one of my daily ones that I have up on my screen, just because it's a smaller community. We kind of know everybody. It's a great way to pass jobs around, get, tech questions answered, ask business questions, how people do stuff like that. And I think that's kind of been invaluable, especially the last 4 years, if not before that, even more. Just because, it still has the sense of community, even though we're all basically working remote at this point.
Absolutely. Do you have any tips or tricks for anybody who's looking to build those kind of communities in their own cities?
Yeah, I think I was just talking to somebody about this. I was at Camograph a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to them about kind of the same thing. And it really just comes down to reaching out to, people you do know and saying, even if it's 2 or 3 people, say like, hey, let's go have a drink, or, let's go, play some darts or whatever at a place one night and just, get together. And I think beyond that, if you live in a place where you're like, okay, well, I'm not sure if anybody even lives here, obviously it's easier living in Chicago in a big, metropolitan area. So it's kind of easy to find someone, at least one person that does something similar. But if you live in a place and you're not sure how big the scene is, I've been on, I'll go on LinkedIn, I'll just type in my city and motion design and just start adding some people that, have motion design in their profile and also live in the same city. So that's been an even better way to kind of connect with other local people, because then, they're local. There's kind of no pressure because it's, the internet. So yeah, I think that's kind of the best way to start building the roots of it. And then, if you feel like it usually takes one person deciding to set up the thing, one person who says, I really want this, so I got to do it. I got to find an address for everybody to show up at a time and whatever. So I think that's kind of the biggest, what you got to do is somebody just has to bite the bullet and push go, essentially.
It's great when that pops up, right? It's great when someone takes the time to say, hey, I do want that. This is what I'm going to do. They pop it up. And all of a sudden, you start seeing it, whether it be on Eventbrite or something like that, appears. Just like even LinkedIn, you're like, oh, that's cool. Like I didn't know that was even a thing. I can't wait to go to that kind of stuff and network and
exactly.
A lot of it. One of the things I really like about your website is your alchemy section. I think it's a great way to kind of like showcase your personal work that isn't client facing, but it's where you're experimenting, trying things like that. Can you talk to me a little bit, like what got you interested in kind of creating that alchemy page on your website?
Yeah, I think maybe it's in the last couple of years where, for at least, especially for artists, kind of the social media thing has started to hit the brakes a little bit in terms of, getting our stuff in front of each other, getting our stuff in front of whoever you want to see it. I think that's getting tougher and tougher. And now that there are more and more platforms, it kind of turns into, do I post it on every platform? What do I post on each platform? Those kind of things. And I think the biggest saving grace is LinkedIn has really kind of absorbed a lot of people posting work and creative things like that other artists and potential clients actually can see. But things like, Instagram, if I post something there, it's up for maybe 12 hours and then it doesn't see the light of day anymore. So I really just kind of wanted a place that was more permanent for people who found their way to my website and whatever that was basically a social media feed, but it doesn't need to be liked or anything. It's just here's a bunch of the other stuff that I've been making for fun that isn't, hidden behind an account of social media or lost in a feed of other things that you'll never see again. It was kind of more just bringing it all together, so it was in a permanent place that's not going to go belly up anytime soon.
I love that because you're right, like especially when it comes to posting on like Instagram or something like that. Having that page on your website, I feel like would alleviate the pressure of like, oh, I gotta post like once a week or something like that. I gotta get something out there. You're posting it essentially into the void, hoping it does something, and then like you said, 12 hours later, like cool, it's basically put in the box and put underground, and
exactly.
Someone will see it.
Right. Yeah. The couple bots like it right away, and then some of your friends see it, and then that's it forever. So yeah, I think just having that, because it's a lot of cool stuff. There's Ethan Bernowski is another Chicago guy. He created basically film festival for that kind of stuff called Moonlighters. And last year, this was the second year that he ever ran it. And he rented out a theater and let anybody who did anything that wasn't for clients just submit it. He put together like an hour edit, and it was stuff from like people's short films to, experimental stuff people were doing to like GIFs and loops that, probably had no reason to be on a theater screen ever, but it was cool kind of seeing that still creative artwork stuff that we do celebrated outside of people swiping past it right away. So I think that there's still room for that kind of stuff, even for the fun things that we're making.
You inspired me. I'm gonna have to reach out to local venues. We have one in Mold City where they do like Sidewalk Film Festival, which is it's like they have like their own theater and stuff like that. I gotta reach out to them now. I got to reach out to them and see like if that's something they do or something like that. That's really cool. Well, we're going to pivot. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Let's pivot. All right. Let's talk Dungeons and Dragons, man.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. All right. So do you prefer being a dungeon master or do you prefer being in the game?
Oh, man. I'll say currently, because, Dungeons and Dragons is one of those things where time is irrelevant. It's getting 5 adults together in the same time is a challenge to begin with, but I've lucked into being the DM for about 3 different groups, and I play in one group, and we're like maybe every 4 months we'll play a game, but every time I'm like preparing and running the game, I am like, man, it must be so much fun for the players to just like show up and have fun instead of doing all this and sitting here the night before or whatever. So I like preparing and creating stuff as a DM, but man, the experience of being a player just is fun to show up and have fun.
It's interesting actually. So back when I was running the D&D games, we had a bit of a mini organization at the uni I was at, and it was just kind of understood by all the DMs that like when you're DMing a game, it's like you're constantly in a state of stress test. It's like the players will find a way to break your game. And one of the really interesting soft skills I think we all ended up developing from that was problem solving. Actually, it was like critical thinking and being able to just know that like you're gonna have to do things on the fly. Has that translated over to your work as well? Just being able to take those skills and develop them from there.
I think if anything, the opposite, where I kind of had those skills from work, and then that's maybe what made me want to try being a dungeon master and going into it. Because the first game I ever played was when I was full-time at a studio. All of us that were there were like, hey, we should just hang out after work and see what Dungeons and Dragons is like. And then we were playing in the conference room like after hours, like once a week or whatever. So I think it was more being good at what we do made it really easy to manage all of this information at once and kind of process it and deliver it in a creative way. I think if anything, it's more that.
Mike, you were just like, no sleep. I want to keep like processing. Let's go troubleshooting.
I love sleep now, so don't get me wrong.
That's awesome. So what is your favorite class to play though when you are being a player?
Oh man, I've only played a couple of them, and I think the one that I'm most excited to play next is Wizard, because I've been playing like either like a ranger or fighter, and I'm ready to just like manage some spells and sling some spells and do that kind of thing.
I can work with that. I normally run Warlock on my end because while I do love spells, I just don't like thinking that hard about choosing the spells. I'm like, hey, Magic Missile, we'll just stick with that for a bit. Maybe Mage Hand to really throw off the DM a little every now and then.
Eldritch Blast.
Yeah, oh man, you're right. It's not even Magic Missile. What am I saying? My bad. It's Eldritch Blast.
Yeah, you got to do it. Oh yeah. The main group that I play with now is a bunch of other motion design people I met at Half Res, and we just kind of started talking about it, and that's where we were like, hey, I guess let's all get together, and now we've been playing for the last 5 or so years.
Okay, everybody, that was Mike Pindara, aka Arcane Motion, expert 3D motion designer with strong compositing experience as well. Mike, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely, man. Happy to be here.
Awesome. And make sure to follow Mike on Instagram. You can find him at arcane_motion, as well as website, which is arcanemotion.com. And finally, find him on LinkedIn at mpindara.